of the Audit and Governance Committee. I would like to welcome to it's 5 o'clock, so we should welcome. I am welcoming you all for this virtual meeting of Handlo Audit and Governance Committee. I would also like to welcome the members of the committee who are sitting this evening, as well as council officers who will be assisting members throughout the meeting. In addition, I would like to welcome members of the public who are watching this meeting at home. Now, the way this meeting will work will be, I as chair will be running the meeting and inviting people to speak. It is very easy for people to speak over each other in the meeting like this. I will ask each member or officer to speak in turn and at the appropriate stage, and everyone will have a chance. This will mean that there should normally be no need for people to interrupt or to ask to speak. However, if a member does have an urgent reason to interject, for example, for a point of order, please do so by turning on your microphone and telling me that you wish to interject. The exception to this will be the committee to our finance officer who may turn on their microphone to alert me to any procedural or finance issue that needs addressing, although I would expect this to be a rare occurrence. The etiquette for the members of the committee and the officers who are expecting to speak will be to mute your microphone until you are asked to speak. This means that only one person will be speaking at a time, and there will be no background noise, making it easier for us all to follow the meeting, and also those who are watching at home. I will also ask members always to say who they are when they make a contribution, and to speak slowly and clearly for the same reason. So these were just for you to remember how the meeting will be running. So I go to the first item on the agenda is the apologies for absence, declaration of interest, or other communication from members. It seems everybody, whosoever should be in the meeting, is there. Yes, Theo.
Yes, can I just give my apologies on the off chance I may be leaving early, right before the end of the meeting. I have to pick up my daughter from the station, but that's probably going to be sometime after 6. So hopefully most of the business will be done.
Yeah, thank you. If there is any other person who has to leave early, or I think our meeting will run very efficiently, and we will be able to finish meeting not that long. But you can, whenever you need, you can leave. Okay, Theo? Thank you. Now,
Chair.
Is there any? Yes, George.
Yeah, Chair, it's Councillor Richard Eason. I suppose as a declaration of interest, item number 3, I and other members probably have as well, have received correspondence about various complaints that are being reported on in the report on the Code of Conduct. I'm keeping an open mind on the matters that are being reported in that in item 3. But I just want, for avoidance of any doubt, I have received correspondence on some of those matters. Thank you.
I think.
And Chair, are we doing a round of introductions?
I'm coming to that now. Okay, what I was going to say that now at this stage, I will say take that members would be, I will ask members to speak according to the surname. Unsa's name comes first. Let me see as, yeah. Now, in order of will be Councillor Unsa Chaudhary will first, then Councillor Theo Dennison, number 2, Councillor Richard Easton, Vice Chair, 3, Councillor Amrit Maan. Is he there?
Councillor Mann has given apologies for lateness. He will be arriving a little bit late to the meeting.
Okay, that's why I didn't hear it. And then I thought that everybody there. Then is Councillor John Todd. So that's and we also have officers who will be presenting reports, including those who are present here is, I will say at the item, but I also tell all the officers who are here is Rachel McCoy, Paul Provert, and Rupa Raghvani, Mike Pinder, and Suresh Patel, a representative from our external auditors, Mazars. In addition to officers above, we also have Jaspal Sandhu and Welli from committee services. We also have officers acting in producing role in the technical side of the meeting, but as they are expected to be involved in the discussion of the meeting, I will thank them. They are not taking part in the meeting, so I will thank them for their help, but not introduce them by name. Okay, is there anything I missed? Okay, so let me again start from the first item on the agenda, apologies for absence, declaration of interest, or any other communication from members. I've noted, Richard, your consolation, your comments, and so that you receive the correspondence from people. Okay, if none, so we go to the second item on the agenda. That's the review of the Council's use of regulations of investigatory powers, Act 2000. It's what we call in brief, RIPA report. Rachel McCoy, our Assistant Director, Audit and Governance, she is here to present this report.
Thank you, Chair. So this is an update review of the actions taken by the Council under the provisions of the RIPA, which is the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act 2000. So it's just an update report that needs to be updated to the committee on a yearly basis. The report sets out the statutory obligations and the respective roles within the authority in terms of reporting and the hierarchy of that in terms of responsibilities, so that the responsibilities of officers are set out at paragraph 5. I don't know if the committee wants me to go through them or if that's kind of taken as read, but I'll be led by you, Chair, if you want me to go through those arrangements. The reporting structure has changed slightly from what the committee would have seen last year at the previous update report, in that my appointment now means that I am I have a coordinating officer role alongside my deputy MO, and also I'm the senior responsible officer. So it's my responsibility to keep the policy and procedures up to date, amending, deleting as necessary, as set out there. In terms of any reports on the use of these provisions over the last 12 months, the update is we haven't there hasn't been any use of these powers. And we've collated a new central register. So I've been doing some work in this area to just make sure that we have the central register, we have updated forms, ensuring that client departments receive the training, which is a requirement. So that's all in place. And there is a second tranche of training on the 1st of February that will be taking place. So, you know, I will be ensuring that this is kind of cascaded further throughout the authority and just kept live, so that all officers that need the training are made aware of it, and will be helping to facilitate and coordinate that. So I'm not sure if there are any questions, but nothing's really happened in this space for the last year. That's the update.
Thank you very much, Rachel. And this item is for noting, but
Yes.
Is there anybody who wants to ask anything, any question? Theo Denison, Councillor Theo Denison, yes.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to ask, given that this is a null report, is this a null report because of exceptional circumstances over the last year, or is this something you might expect to continue into the future? And what areas previously have we expected to actually use, as opposed to could use, RIP powers?
Yeah, so in terms of future use, going forward this year, we will be using these powers. The enforcement team under Victoria Wallace, we've already been in conversations with them about some of the surveillance operations that they will be undertaking that then will engage these powers. That's kind of that's the interface in terms of any covert investigations. So that could be trading standards, just everything that falls under community safety, those types of prosecutions, unauthorised selling of tobacco to children. I'm just thinking of these types of examples, but that's where it would engage, or any secret recording, covert operations. Basically, we need permission to do that. So that is the main source. In terms of prior to my joining the authority, the previous reports on this say that there weren't any incidents or use of these powers, and that's my understanding from the officers as well. I mean, Mike Pinder may have historic beyond the last set of reports that I've had a look at, but certainly going forward, that's what we will be using it, because I'm aware of some investigations that will be commencing later this year.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm just slightly surprised by it, because there are certainly two particular areas where RIP powers might be useful, and I would have thought we would have expected to be using it quite regularly, not just we might do it in the future. One being, of course, fly tipping and the like around the borough, which is it's not quite endemic, but it's a nasty little problem that often requires the observation of areas where dumping actually occurs. And the second one is the illegal subletting of council properties to others, which again we have a significant problem with that, and RIP powers will be particularly useful in terms of identifying where that is happening.
Yeah, so I'm not sure what prosecutions have taken place in the past on illegal dumping, but yes, that is totally a hotbed area where these powers are engaged, fly tipping and all of those types of operations. So I'm not sure. I mean, I thought it's quite surprising as well, but that's kind of that's what I've been told was the historic position. But going forward, we will be using them and making sure that everyone is up to speed on their obligations in this arena. So I'm not saying that they weren't previously, but I'm just can only account for what I've been told since tenure here.
Is Councillor Rajawat here to answer questions relating to this item, since it's his report?
No, he's not here at present.
In which case, Rachel, has Councillor Rajawat given any indication as to why fly tipping and illegal subletting of council properties isn't uppermost in his mind in terms of the use of these powers? And has he given an indication what his intentions are for the future?
No, he hasn't. It's just speaking with Victoria Wallace and the team just on some of the operations that they've got insight, which it does include actually illegal dumping as well. That's one that is one
we haven't
area.
seen it. That is the issue, I think. But thank you, Rachel, for your answers. You at least have been very, very clear. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dennison. Is there anybody else who wants to ask any question?
I'll put my hand up.
Councillor Easton, and
I'll put my hand up after Mr. Dennison. You acknowledge my name. Can you hear me?
Yes. Councillor John Todd, yes, I heard what.
Yeah, well, I congratulate Rachel for waking up a dormant administration. This is dynamic legislation, and it's laid there rotting in a cupboard. Really, it's well, I'm really shocked and annoyed because, like Councillor Dennison, we have major problems with fly tipping. It's now a profession.
Yes.
It's a profession. They're not amateurs. Number plates taken off and all that sort of thing. Be interesting with the amount of fraud with the grants. But I'm delighted to see Rachel's found this at the bottom of a cupboard. I think she's been one minor error, if I may. No one's looked at this since 2019, I think, Rachel. There was that was the last day of the inspection.
Yeah.
So let's go. Anyway, I'm not here to criticise you. Congratulations on your report. I agree with Councillor Dennison. We've got to remind both Vicky Wallace that she should be using this more effectively. One minor query, someone might know, am I correct in saying that enforcement has now been taken from one senior director to another?
That's correct, Councillor Todd. So Victoria Wallace's enforcement team now falls under Victoria Lawson.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah. So there's just to add, so there's like a whole training piece underway as well with the enforcement team, just to bolster and kind of, work on the direction of travel.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's a piece underway in that space, and this weaves into all of that because absolutely.
Okay, and Chair, one final
investigations can't be undertaken without using these powers. So yeah.
Sorry, Rachel, I do apologise. Theo mentioned Mr. Pinder. It'd be handy to know what Ealing use it for, if you could, Mike.
Hi all. So it's used. So surveillance is used where necessary, but it is a last resort, and that is set out by the regulations. So I would say Ealing use it rarely. What you'll find in a lot of the enforcement areas is they do overt surveillance. So if you've got a big CCTV camera there and it says CCTV camera, you don't need a ripper for it.
Yeah.
So some of the areas you've described, they kind of use the overt surveillance. So it's not that we're not using surveillance in some of the areas that you've suggested. It's just that they've adopted processes. And as I said, with Ripper, it tends to be very much you have to prove that you've gone through all the other reasonable investigations prior to using it. So for tenancy, for example, we do a lot of work up until that point. So we don't necessarily need to use the surveillance on tenancy fraud investigations. So actually, inactivity in this area isn't unusual for a lot of councils. Certainly, my experience in working over at Ealing and in my previous council, we didn't actually utilise RIPA that much, but it is, as you say, a very important resource for those investigations where we're unable to do it through other means.
Mike, thanks very much. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor John Todd. Councillor Easton, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just echo the concerns that have been expressed by my colleagues, particularly around fly tipping, tenancy fraud, and I might add another one of unlawful dwellings, the investigation of potential beds and sheds, which is of concern to lots of residents. So it does feel as though our officers haven't been using or able to use the full extent of the tools available to them. But I am familiar with the use of overt cameras to deter and detect fly tipping, and I've had those deployed in my ward on a number of occasions successfully for disrupting fly tipping. So I understand that that's not doesn't invoke these these regulations. Elsewhere in the borough, I've heard accusations of commercial businesses fly tipping, where perhaps this should be included in the investigation and targeting, and I've encouraged ward councillors there to engage with Vicky's team on that. One final comment would be about Section 8 on page 14 and 15, covert surveillance of social networking sites, and noting that that's part of the document that was last revised in September 2019. I'm conscious that social networking sites are changing quite rapidly. So I just question whether that section needs to be looked at in the context, probably particularly with gathering information around tenancy fraud, subletting, etc. So whether activity on things like Nextdoor and even TikTok, etc., can be relevant for some of the more difficult investigations, and that being quite a and that technology evolving quite quickly. So I'd throw that one in the mix, but very much welcome that this report is coming back, and coming annually to us. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Consolation. Is there anybody else who wants to say anything? Any comment?
If you don't mind, Chair, I'd just like to come back on Mike's comment, which I fully appreciate the experience of that Mike has elsewhere. It's just, I mean, I used to work in the enforcement team at Westminster City Council, and what we would normally expect in terms of the use of RIPA is an escalation of cases. So yes, of course, we'd try and resolve these matters without the need for any covert observation, and yes, we would be using cameras to try and deter people from fly tipping, etc. But inevitably, unless the borough is cleansed of these problems, and there's no evidence that that's the case in Hounslow, we still have a significant problem, as John Todd has quite rightly identified, a very significant problem in terms of both fly tipping and illegal subletting. And therefore, we would expect a sort of a throughput of an escalation of cases, not billions of them, but at least some of them. And the fact that there hasn't been a single case since 2019, and I don't know what the case was before 2019, it just doesn't sit right in terms of what's actually been going on. And that's why I asked originally, is this caused by the unusual circumstances of the last year or so with COVID? But, that hasn't been picked up as being the reason for this, which just suggests to me that the level of enforcement is not as significant as it needs to be in order to get on top of these problems. And that is something I think that the lead member, if he'd been here to report on this matter, as I think he should, would have been able to pick up on and maybe give us some reassurance that these things are actually in hand. But I have to say I'm sharing Councillor Todd's concern here that maybe this is something that's gathering dust rather than actually being done properly.
Thank you, Councillor Dennison. Anybody else? If not, I think I just said that this report is for us to note. But before we go to the next item, I just want to say I was very pleased to read this report, because there are so many things which should be for the safety, others for the welfare, for others, all sorts of actions which we take in Hounslow. I think it's a very balanced exercise. We do, there's nothing where people say that it shouldn't have happened. People know that there are some people who need support of the community, and there are other people who commit those offences sometime, and they should be also punished. I think we in Hounslow have a very good balanced report, and it's a good report which says you the steps we can take for any offence or anything where it is needed. Thank you very much, and report noted. We go to the item 3 now. That is again Rachel McCoy's item, and it's page 19 to page 19 to 27. And again, this is a review of the complaints made under the Code of Conduct. Okay. Rachel. Ms. McCoy, you're...
Chair, I think Rachel might have frozen, might be having some internet issues.
Shall we go to the next item and we will come back?
Can come back. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. We go to item 4. Yeah. And that item 4 is the draft risk management strategy, page 28 to 44. And for this item will be presented by Paul Probert, who is our head of policy, and Mandy Skinner, assistant chief executive. 2 people will be presenting this report.
Thank you, Chair. It'll just be me for this one. This report brings to you a new draft risk management strategy and a high level in outline new corporate risk register. You may recall the outline in the strategy we brought in September, and the approach as outlined here sort of builds upon that. It sets in the Appendix A out the principles, the approach, the roles and responsibilities that we're proposing to take to corporate, operational, project risks, and indeed get recognition for some of the risks that we carry as being a partner in the borough too. It really is an opportunity for the committee to make comment and contribution. The report referenced here will be going to Cabinet. Apologies, I think it says February. It is very likely to be March, because following the committee, we will need to do some work, as you'll see in that Appendix B on the outline draft register. We need to do more work there on the assessment of risk and the mitigations. If you go back to the last time that the previous register was presented here last year, you'll see that there is a lot of read across, but there's also some change. But at that point, Chair, really keen to hear the committee's views. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anybody wants to make any comment? This item is for you to note both. Note and comment upon the revised council-wide approach to risk management, and also propose the new corporate risk register. Is there anybody else who wants to ask any question? Councillor Easton?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think Mandy was looking for quite significant input from us in terms of discussion on this. Probably each member will have things to say. From my and we had a very useful briefing on the tool to be used for this earlier this afternoon, which was very welcome and helped illustrate where we're going. So so in terms of the strategy, the main thing that concerns me is the section on culture on page 40 and 41. I'd like to see that go a lot further in terms of developing a culture where there is that is supportive of openness and honesty, and that people and that everyone within the organisation on a one Hounslow basis feels able to raise issues and without fear of repercussion, and that they will be and that those so they can contribute to the understanding of risk and progress along the way of that without fear, and even and especially when what they're reporting or what they're raising might be uncomfortable to higher ups in various areas. So I'd like to see something brought out a lot clearer there. And then in terms of Appendix B and the corporate risk register, just a few specific points. On page 42, we've got a failure in the second one, failure in the safeguarding of children in the council's care. I think that perhaps needs to be split into two corporate risks. One specifically around our looked after children who are in the council's care, and a second risk similar to the failure in safeguarding of vulnerable adults, but failure in the safeguarding of children, young people in the general population. So I think it would be quite useful to have that distinction, so that we've got a very clear high level risk about the children, the looked after children. And then something which is missing is anything about the built environment. I think we need something at a high level about the built environment, about the safety and the health of buildings in the borough. So that includes things like building standards, so cladding, the lessons from Grenfell, all of that I think needs to be bundled up in something at a high level. At present, some of that I think is buried under the climate change one, but I think it warrants something at the high level, which also includes what we're building as far as homes of the future. We've got a risk that we're actually building or allowing to be built substandard homes that will be overcrowded and substandard, that the next generation will not thank us for. So I think those were my comments. I'm sure that every other member will have other things to add as well. And I would welcome some discussion on as this evolves before it goes to cabinet. So I'm happy to receive an updated draft offline in due course. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think I'm very happy that in these reports, in our last meeting, we had good discussion on various points. And I think our points have been taken into consideration. Thanks. Is the report noted, Holder?
Sorry, Chair. I was indicated that I'd be quite keen to speak if you don't mind.
Okay, no, go ahead, Councillor Denzil. Most welcome.
I take it that Councillor Edward still isn't here, which is again, unfortunately, given that it's one of his reports. But just a point with reference to Appendix B. Firstly, whose risk assessment is this? I mean, this is going to be the council's risk assessment, but who's inspired it in terms of the content? Because I mean, I say the last one I looked at in great detail was several years ago, and it's quite a marked change in terms of the number of and type of risks that are being identified. And I'm just not entirely convinced some of these risks are appropriate. I noticed, for example, that they're all down as impact likelihood to be confirmed. Well, just taking one obvious example, climate change, I'm pretty darn certain that writing something into a report is not going to prevent climate change from impacting on our borough. And given the failures of COP26, it's absolutely guaranteed that we're going to be hitting 2% warming by 2030, whether we like it or not. So given that, maybe some of the actions, having an action plan is one thing, but how are we going to cope with the difficulties that climate change are actually going to bring to this borough is my obvious question, because the mitigation suggestions just don't seem to be of a scale relevant to deal with them. The second one is actually in terms of COVID. Again, without wishing to get party political, the overall response in the UK to COVID is to say the least bit disappointing. I'm trying to do this without swearing, frankly. I think it's been lamentable. And when we're putting up with hundreds of people dying every week as a result of COVID, I do think we need to be mindful of the fact that while government might not yet have got on top of this, we need to do our utmost to deal with it. And simply passing on the instructions or the guidance from government doesn't really hit it. So it's not a risk. This is a certainty. We're living with it every day, and it would be nice to see something more than just a proposed action plan and, in essence, going through the motions. We're talking about a significant impact on our residents, and frankly, just because the government is fast asleep at the wheel doesn't mean that we should be as well. The third one actually is in terms of the weakening of the council's financial position, which is why I was particularly keen to speak to Councillor Rajawat with reference to it. The mitigation measures suggested, every single one of those was in place in Slough, in Croydon, in Northamptonshire, and it didn't stop this thing happening. So the question really is, what are we going to do to ensure that we don't become a Slough or a Croydon or a Northamptonshire, that members of the public can have some assurance that in essence these matters are actually being dealt with. And then I think my last point actually is coming back to the first one about whose assessment of risk is this? Because we've done almost biannual, once every 2 years, resident surveys, and two of the things that pop up very significantly, one of the things that pops up very significantly of that is fear of crime, particularly at night, walking in their local area. Not too bad during the day, but when it comes to the evenings, women in particular, but not just women, are concerned about their safety walking in our borough and the other places I accept, but in our borough late at night. Again, that's not here at all, and yet that's always been identified as a significant risk in those resident surveys. And then just lastly, picking up on Richard's excellent point with reference to cladding and the like, there's nothing in here about cladding, and yet we know there are a number of blocks within the borough where cladding is an issue, and we suspect that others are there too. And what are we doing to ensure that we do not have, we might not have, but we will not have an incident that has hit Kensington and Chelsea, which is otherwise quite a decently well-run borough. But the point is, you've got to look at the likelihood of these things, and when you know these properties are a distinct risk, what actions are we taking to remove it as a risk? Not mitigate as a risk, but remove it as a risk. And that's not what's in this report, and I'm slightly rather disappointed that that's the case. And maybe one could pass this on to Councillor Rajawat so that he could attend to it at Cabinet.
Could I just respond
Yes.
to that, Chair, if that'd be helpful? So thank you very much. Just to sort of go back to what this is and your point, Councillor Dennison, about the assessment. This is drawn from the last time that the committee had a copy of the risk register, the corporate risk register, which I think was April last year. So it is not by any means the whole of the corporate risk register. And I think at the top of that Appendix B tried to sort of explain that this was an officer assessment at early stage so that the committee could make exactly these points. What else do you think you should be seeing at that corporate level reading across into the strategy, of course, there will be other tiers of risk management in relation to service, operational issues, and indeed project risks. So I think what I've heard today is certainly some points about what you expect to see at the corporate level, and we can take that away. And in terms of the mitigations and the assessments, as I said at the beginning, that is what we plan to do next. The existing risk register continues. This is the refresh of it. Absolutely fine to continue to have the dialogue. It will be going to Cabinet, as I said, in the next couple of months, with those mitigations in much more detail. And I sort of anticipate it looking more like the level of detail that you had in the last risk register in April last year. This really was, is this the coverage that you expect? I've heard some point back. I've written them down. Very, very helpful. And indeed also to think about that next tier and making sure that the committee can see, if it's not at the corporate level, where else does it sit and how are we managing it?
Thank you very much. I can see somebody's hand at the back.
It's mine, Jagdish.
Okay, Councillor Todd, yes.
I readily endorse Councillor Dennison's comments, but I want to go back to what Richard Easton says and my general concern about this emotive word risk. The reality is that children in care, over the last year, there have been 2 adverse Ofsted reports. Now, that's not acceptable. They weren't advertised, but put that to one side. What it highlighted to me is the quality of management, and I'm not criticising the director or assistant director, but it's a need for vigilance. And I'm a great believer in peer group reviews. I'm going off the page a bit, but when I found deficiencies in the complaint system with young children in care, the creativity, the new innovation that came out borough was refreshing. And at the risk of being rude to Mandy, I don't want to, I worry about the accountability of our senior officer team. We see no papers on how they make their decisions. I'll give an example. The medium-term financial strategy shows that Ms. Skinner has taken on a large number of staff. No one, I compared the staffing payroll, it's gone up 15 million since this administration started. Lots of things, it's about accountability, but in that scrutiny, in that accountability, if it takes place properly, it enhances the role of the council and minimise risk. Mandy, I think you've got a dreadful job on your hands here trying to do this. What makes me incandescent, and I have discussed it with Niall, and got what I call disappointing. You have, or this administration and others, I don't want to personalise it, have totally diluted the performance data. You just read it, it's utter waffle, and look at the wording that goes with it. It's for the benefit of staff to enhance their role. It's not, it's for people like me to see huge gaps in the system. You know, when I go to children in care and that people are supposed to write reports within X number of weeks, a senior officer says, we've partially met that figure. Well, they hadn't. They were supposed to be 80%, it was under 50. And this glib conversation, this glib dialogue, just says that no one is doing their job properly in an oversight level. Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor Todd. I think it will be a good idea sometime for you. You are a senior member of the Conservative Party, and many members take a note of what you say, and constructive things, you know, that the chair and the other committee responsible members take note of that and try to take appropriate steps to address those things. So that will be a good thing, but thank you for your contribution. Can I just say now, is that report is for noted, everybody?
Great.
And now we go back again to item 3 for Rachel McCoy. Rachel, are you there?
She's muted. You're muted, Rachel.
Oh, you're muted, I think.
Sorry, apologies. I'm having some technical difficulties at this end. So apologies that I previously, and I can't actually bring up my report. So I'm not sure if Chair, if you'd like to move to the next item while I continue to try and bring it up, or I can just present it from memory without reference to it.
I leave it to you to decide. You can take it to the next meeting if it's not that important yet, or in the sense that we don't need to have it take any quick action on this report, or you can just if you
shall I just try to just to present kind of what I recall that it said. So apologies. So this report is an update to the committee on the member complaints that have been received by the authority. This is part of an update that I will be doing on an annual basis, so that the committee has oversight of the number of complaints that are received, and then a breakdown of, if they were upheld, if the number that go on to investigation, the number that are dealt with by informal resolution, and also just some information regarding what they kind of related to, and their genesis, whether they're complaints from the members of the public or from members in respect of other members, or if they are member officer related complaints. So that's what I've tried to do. There is a table at Appendix A that is attached. So members will see there that there was a high volume of complaints in 2020, some 51. A percentage of these were dealt with by Jessica Farmer when she was the interim monitoring officer, and then the remainder by myself when I started with the authority in June. As I've set out in the narrative, just to explain to members, because it does seem really disproportionate, like, wow, that is a huge amount of complaints received within a year, almost one a week. But just to assure the committee that the vast majority of them were related to the C9 transport scheme that the council is implementing, and the decisions that flowed from that at each stage. So the main cabinet decision, then the chief officer decisions that kind of flowed from that, then reports back to overview and scrutiny. So throughout that whole decision-making process, it's attracted complaints from residents and residents groups. So sometimes it's one complaint on a particular issue related to it, but from, for example, like 6 or 7 people. So the numbers quickly tally. So that's what the vast majority of those complaints are. In terms of the remainder, a percentage were related to members' conduct at committees, and also in the social media space, but again, largely linked in with the transport schemes, but about members' interests and declarations of interests. What I would say is that we have, I think there's about 14 outstanding at the moment, but again, some of those there's 3 related complaints from one person. I mean, they're individual complaints, but again, it makes the figures seem higher than well, it explains them. It explains them to the committee. The vast majority of those complaints have not been upheld, as you will see. Members will know that one complaint went to standards and that wasn't upheld. There is one further complaint that's with investigators. It's under investigation, external investigation at the moment. And yeah, 4 were dealt with by informal resolution, and the remainder, they haven't been upheld, basically. So and as part of this process, they have been through the IP at all stages. So even the ones dealt with informally have still had endorsement of the independent persons. So I hope I've covered most things. What I would add, actually, before I answer your questions on this, is that this is the first one. So the committee, you may have ideas of additional information that you'd like to see within these reports going forward, and I'd welcome your views on that. And then if it can be accommodated, then certainly. What I thought would be useful going forward on these is to categorise, and I've already done this for this year, into the types of complaints in categories. So the next report would have the categories, if it's lobbying, if it's conduct, if just a bit more articulation, and then the table would be populated with a bit more information. But anyway, that's probably enough from me, and apologies that I can't see the report, but happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mr. McCoy. And any question, anybody? Councillor Danson?
Strictly speaking, it's not really a question. Complaints are always, whether it's about members or about the council or anything else, are one of those really difficult things that local authorities tend to find it difficult to deal with. In the private sector, long ago, I mean decades ago, private companies recognised that listening to complaints, understanding complaints, getting in at the heart of the matter is the key to making their products and their services better. And the report before us just doesn't address that issue, I'm afraid, Rachel. And I appreciate that you're planning to bring another report with greater breakdown at a later date on another occasion. But frankly, this report needs that, and particularly given the numbers, I'm extremely concerned that, when I read this, I was staggered that this number of complaints were submitted about members of the council. And given that they're all currently being selected or otherwise considered for election in May, I would have thought this was absolutely the time when you should be reporting in detail about what our current crop of councillors are getting up to. And, that may be the case that some people have an issue about CS9, but just because CS9 was a hot issue and a lot of people didn't like it, doesn't mean that people would normally complain about it in terms of the attitude or behaviours of members. There's a world of difference between I don't like this policy, I don't like that building, and I don't think this councillor has done things appropriately. So if it wouldn't be a significant inconvenience, Rachel, I'd just like to invite you to bring this report back to the next meeting. And I'm not too sure if I'm actually going to be on that if the election intercedes. But either way, I think there should be a detailed report that covers, the magnitude of these issues, rather than simply a report as this is to note, particularly when, members of the public, in just a matter of months, will be determining whether or not individual councillors should or should not be elected. I think it's a timely report. It should have the detail, and I invite you to bring it back next time so that members of the public and ourselves can be satisfied of what these issues really are and what the council is doing about it. Again, the member responsible is not here to talk to this report. It will be really useful to know what this administration is going to do about the fact that it is provoking complaints on a significant scale, which I suspect, is unheard of as far as this authority is concerned. And there's no reference to previous years, so we can't actually vouch for that. But is it bigger than it was last year or the year before? Is it more significant than Ealing, which has got similar issues in terms of transport, controversial transport matters? it would be useful to know. I fear this is not the usual pattern that we would expect, and I think more detail would be relevant as far as this report. And I invite you, as I say, to bring this report back next time with that detail provided.
So if I could come back, if I may, on a few points raised. So in terms of benchmarking against what went previous, I don't have that information, I'm afraid. And this is the first, as I understand, report that the committee has had that kind of articulates or reports to the committee on the status of member complaints, but I don't have the benchmarking or the data from before my tenure. So it's kind of almost like ground zero, and how we kind of capture it going forward. And
to be honest, I slightly suspected that was the case, Rachel, which is why getting a good baseline, and this provides at least, even if these complaints were dealt with absolutely appropriately and were not, as so many of them were, no breach of the code identified, at least understanding them in significant numbers, as we have now, would provide us with a benchmark, which is why it wouldn't be a waste of time to spend a little bit more effort to actually provide what information we have to ensure that that benchmark is provided. And perhaps all of us could agree across party that having a high number of member complaints from members of the public in particular is something we would want to see avoided.
Yes. Could I just check then with the Councillor Denson, in terms of how you'd like it presented? So would it be headings which just explains a little bit more how many were related to the overview and scrutiny element, how many were, and a bit of narrative? Or is it categories, a bit more information on the categories of complaints as opposed to every single 51 complaints?
Well, I think it probably ought to be all 51 complaints should be identified and what they were. I think that would be really helpful. Without having seen what those complaints are, it's very difficult to suggest what it ought to be, but some degree of granularity short of whatever you're trying to avoid by not providing information. I mean, are we trying to avoid GDPR issues? It's relatively straightforward to avoid GDPR issues. It might be that when people make a complaint, they're happy for their complaints to be made public, in which case they ought to be given that opportunity. And certainly in terms of councillors who've fallen foul of members of the public, I'm not entirely convinced that their name should not be given, in the sense that I think it's helpful to know what was the issue and what did this person think this councillor had done that was wrong. That doesn't mean that we agree that any complaint should immediately mean that someone should be decapitated. But understanding what complaints have been raised about what councillors at what stage of what process and why is the key to actually understanding is there something, for example, as far as those committee related complaints, that the chairs of our committees should be saying to our councillors to prevent them doing something that is provoking people to think this is inappropriate.
Councillor Denison, I think what you're saying is, let me say, my view is that this is the first report we had. Instead of having this report back, would be a good idea for you to have a meeting with Rachel and just you want to discuss further points, the way it should be presented, instead of delaying this report going to the cabinet also. Anytime, I'm sure Rachel would welcome you, whatever contribution you want to make, and in the light of that, something can be agreed that this will be good to include or exclude. Okay, well, is it okay?
Well, let's hear what other members actually have to say. I appreciate every opportunity I get to speak to Rachel. She's a very gifted and able officer. But I think the point is that this is meant to be an issue of responsibility and accountability. We expect, as a resident, I expect councillors to live up to certain standards. I don't expect them to go around annoying residents for any reason whatsoever. The fact that not 51 residents, but the fact that 48 residents have raised complaints about members is, I think, significant. and the opportunity to understand them is given by this particular period. And I think that's what we should take advantage of, rather than actually saying, let's come back at a later date and think about whatever happens then, because that opportunity to learn will have been lost. And to be honest, we do have elections in May. I don't for the life of me remember when the next audit meeting is, but I don't know if there's another one that I will necessarily be serving on. It would be nice to, as a legacy to other colleagues who will be definitely there, that they get an opportunity to see a detailed report on what is a significant issue as far as a significant number of our residents are concerned.
I'm happy to add more detail, Councillor Dennison. That's fine. That's absolutely fine.
I think, Rachel, would be a good idea. What I suggested that Councillor Dennison ask Councillor Dennison, give him time to someday to have a good discussion with you.
If it's just a matter of interest to me, then I'll accept that recommendation, Councillor Sharma. But let's hear what other members of the committee actually think.
Yeah. Okay. Any other member? Councillor
Yes, Chair.
Sorry, did you say Councillor Chowdhury?
Oh, okay. Hello, Councillor Chowdhury.
Who did you pick? Sorry, I didn't hear you.
Sorry.
Did you say me or someone else?
No. I thought I welcome you. I've just seen you now. You were sitting perhaps quietly, nicely. You want to say something?
Yeah.
You want to say something, Ms. Chowdhury?
Yeah, that's okay. I do have my hand up, but I think Richard had his hand up
Didn't see that. Okay, go ahead. You first. Then.
Okay. I'm minded to agree with Theo. I was a bit disappointed that there wasn't much information, to be honest. As Theo has said, 51 complaints is quite a lot. It's almost one per member. It's a significant amount, but it would be helpful to understand what these complaints are and why people are complaining. I also think it will be important to, you have mentioned categories, but I think there needs to be a bit more detail. And okay, some of those complaints weren't upheld, but if someone is complaining for a reason, there's obviously something that they feel needs to be addressed. So I think it'd be helpful as a council to understand what those issues are, and also helpful to understand what the process is. So if a complaint is made against a member, are they informed about it? Are they, what then happens to investigate it? And then how are conclusions made? That information I don't think is as forthcoming as perhaps it could be.
Can I respond, Chair?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So that's noted. I can certainly do that. That's absolutely fine. That I'm happy to provide more information. And I think once that's the committee will then see it for themselves, kind of the categories and what the nub of those complaints were and the groupings of them. So that's absolutely fine. In terms of the process, I mean, that is set out in the Constitution. That's where the process is set out. So when you say you'd like more information on the process, do you want a report that talks about the process? Because it is set out in the Constitution. I'm not sure, just to be clear on what it is you're asking for.
So it's written in the Constitution, this is what happens, but in theory, is that actually, in practice, is that actually what happens? And in terms of frames and things like that, is that, what are they? Because I'm not sure that's necessarily written, is it?
Sorry, can you just repeat the last bit? What did you say?
The timeframes, are they in the Constitution? I don't believe they are. So
no, because the members' complaints, it doesn't follow the corporate complaints timeframes. It doesn't follow that process. So so it's not articulated. There aren't any timelines that you'd see when you go through the corporate complaints procedure. It doesn't work like that, because an investigation, sometimes they have to be undertaken externally, etc. Then there's the independent persons. So it's difficult to kind of regulate the timings with their input, because it takes as long as it takes once it's in their hands. So there aren't any timeframes in that way, and it can't be prescribed in that way either, just because there are other parties who are involved in it, and then it's on their timeline as well. So it's difficult, but no, there aren't any timelines set out anywhere.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Anybody else?
Yes, Chair.
Councillor Todd?
I think Councillor Easton was before me. I'll defer.
Well, I'll give
Sorry,
you
Chair.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Todd. Thank you, Chair. Similar to the previous two members, I welcome the fact that we have a report, and I'm quite alarmed by the volume of complaints, and therefore I really do seek more transparency on this. The Code of Conduct has, I believe, 10 headings, ranging from respect through to I think gifts and hospitality. And I imagine that some of the complaints would hit more than one of those headings.
Yeah.
But I think it would be very useful to know about these 51 across those 10 headings. And I am very concerned about complaints about respect, about politeness, about courtesy, because I think this is these aspects are fundamental to public service. If we're having any members consistently falling short of public expectations on this, under respect, and also the next one, which is bullying, harassment, discrimination, then I think we really should know about that. I would like to see a report which actually catalogues all of the complaints and categorises them, and indicates which councillors have been complained about, and I think that is really important in terms of not just issues of selection and election, but also about the training that is provided. And I wonder whether or not some of the members who are in the public eye may need additional training. And I can think of some of the member development sessions that I have attended, where the members who are in the public eye have been conspicuous by their absence. Now, I also pick up on Councillor Chowdhury's point about timeliness of investigations. I would be concerned about any complaint that is taking more than 2 to 3 months to reach a conclusion. As people know, I have been subject to internal discipline, internal disciplinary processes within Labour, and I can. And that can be extremely distressing for having something hanging over you for a protracted period of time. So I hear, Rachel, I hear what you say about independent persons and external investigators, etc. But I think we must find a way of getting complaints dealt with. Code of conduct complaints dealt with on a much more timely basis. And making sure that we are learning from those. I'm also wondering whether or not the code of conduct actually covers one of the things that I hear from some residents quite often, which is effectively a dereliction of duty by or perceptions of dereliction or accusations of dereliction of duty from members. I hear from residents that say they will not, they never get a reply from ex-councillor. They can't be bothered, or they have no confidence in contacting ex-councillor. And I'm not actually sure that comes up as a code of conduct issue. So some of our peers have been accused of being completely uncontactable, and perhaps even seldom in the country. That aspect gives me concern. And looking at this, I'm not sure that it's squarely covered by the code of conduct, and perhaps it should be. And then I think, in addition, there is the skills thing about particularly the chairing of some committees and things or some hearings or panels where there may be performance issues and concerns raised by residents, and I'm not quite sure where those complaints go, whether they are part of this or whether they're part of a different sort of process. So I think I welcome this as a step, but I really feel that there is a lot more that can be done, and I think we should make an effort of doing that in the next couple of months, whilst we've still got the experience of the last over the last 4 years, because there will no doubt be changes of personnel in May. So I would like to see us have a more comprehensive report on the subject going to council in March. I would like to set that as an expectation, that this is too important to be squirreled away on what the public will perceive as an obscure committee. I think something which is more comprehensive should be tabled for noting by the full council. That's my bit. So thanks.
Thank
Is
you.
there anybody else? Before I think to Councillor Dennis, we should go ahead now. We have given enough time on this item.
Chair, Councillor Todd.
Councillor Todd?
Yeah, I disagree with most of what Mr. Easton said. We're a minority, so perhaps we may be subject to more complaints than others. I don't know. The traffic matter that Theo alluded to, I've never known anything so emotive, so aggressive, and normal, balanced people talking about criminal action against both officers and others. Really, the other thing that worries me is the collective power of people with a purpose. And I'm aware of one or more colleagues who've been trolled by individuals. I hate complaints. I'm very nervous about them, and to be named where I'm cleared, I find that's against natural justice. It always reminds me of when you do a call in. It's John Todd or whoever Councillor Chowdhury did one. It's John Todd against an organisation of thousands. And to me, there's something missing. There should be someone who can advise and guide the member complained about. I've always never understood. There may well be. We were advised there was insurance cover for the work we do in committees, and I'm not suggesting that we get legal advice to extend everyone, but there's a lack of a structure. You may have it in your party. I'm not quite sure. Being named is very sensitive, and I think that should take place. The other final point I don't really understand, Rachel, if you could mind explaining, is you use the words formal resolution. I presume that's like some conciliation where you get an agreement or an apology. Are they ever publicised, or are they very much confidential?
Yeah, they're not published. The only matters that are publicised are matters when they go to standards. So then anyone can see the whole case up on the website, and then it's going to another committee. But in terms of informal resolutions, sometimes on really sensitive matters and sensitive grounds. And what that means is where complaints come in for an initial sift, almost as part of that initial sift, there's such mitigation, they don't advance past that. And then the IP as well. So there's always just so everyone on the committee is aware, it's always through with the IP as well. Then they, we need to consult with them as well, whether because of the, the unique circumstances here, do they agree X, Y, and Z, that it doesn't even proceed, and it doesn't in those cases, which, that there's just a small number that have been dealt with in that way.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Okay.
Chair, could I suggest moving a resolution on this matter?
Yes.
Yeah, I'd like to move on the basis of what Richard and Unter have said. I think there's clearly a degree of concern about this, and as I note from my looking at my diary, there is actually a meeting of the Audit and Governance Committee on the 28th of March. So could I resolve that we invite Rachel to submit a report on this matter, resubmit this report with whatever detail she deems appropriate. I recognise John's point. I wouldn't want to beat up on any member of the council because they just happen to be the subject of a complaint. The issue we're interested in is what is the nature of the complaint, and is there something we and others should be doing about it? That's the key. So if there's 60 councillors, then let's everyone have a letter allocated to them and just report. So we at least know whether one councillor is getting a lot of reports about their behaviour at committee, for example, which is Richard's point. But could we bring that back to the 28th of March, and we'll resolve that issue then, and we'll then have an excellent baseline for all future work in this area, and perhaps we could invite you to come up with some recommendations about how the council or council can proceed in a way that would minimise these sort of complaints. And again, John, I appreciate that there was a lot of controversy and hot feelings thrown up by the CS9 proposal, and it was a very difficult time for a lot of members, including members of the cabinet who felt particularly under fire. But the point is, there is a way of dealing with people, and we expect residents to behave properly as we expect to behave responsibly. And I think at times I have noted, and it would be interesting to know if it were the case, that some councillors seem to revel in actually provoking members of the public rather than actually trying to listen to what they actually have to say and resolve matters that would otherwise be dealt with in a perfectly civilised manner. But could I move that resolution?
Okay, thank you very much. Now, I think as far as the names are concerned, I'm not that I think we have to have legal advice. Names shouldn't come in the committee. That's not our nature. When we want to know about the complaints, it's the nature of complaint and how many names go in. People have committed that sort of offense or done something. I think that then we will know whatever that so many people are in this category. We must do something about that. As far as the training is concerned, at some place we have already raised this issue, and I think the officers will be taking note of that.
Happy to agree with that.
So,
yeah, I would agree with that as well. Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you, Chair. So yeah, happy to give more detail and granularity on the complaints. I won't be naming members in this report, but I'm perfect. This is really helpful as well because it is the first one, and as the committee has said, benchmarking how we get it right, and it serves a really useful purpose. So absolutely, I will do that and get that back. That's absolutely fine.
Okay, thank you very much, Rachel. We go now up to item 5. It's the treasury management strategy, investment strategy, minimum revenue provision policy. I think you all know a lot now in the past in various meetings. A lot of information has been given to all of you. I hope you have digested that information and will use that whenever you want. So For this item, Rupa Ragwani will be dealing with this item, and she is our Assistant Director, Corporate Finance. And Rupa has, I think, three. Yeah. So, thank you, Rupa.
Thank you, Chair, and evening members. Yes, you've got me for quite a few agenda items this evening still to go. So the next one on the agenda is the Treasury Management Strategy with the associated investment strategy and MRP policy. It's the usual report that goes at this time of year. It comes to Audit and Governance Committee for kind of review, kind of consideration, comments, etc. before it then goes on to Cabinet and Borough Council as part of the budget report where it's formally agreed. So it's here for information purposes and for any comments that you want me to take back on it. It's a fairly meaty document. It's a kind of quite technical in some areas. So basically it's there designed to give you an update on the Treasury Management Strategy from last year. It outlines within the report, I should have said it starts on page 45 if anyone is looking for it in the pack. It outlines within there the current year activity and the current year position, but more importantly, because it's a strategy for going forward, outlines the strategy for 22-23, both in terms of borrowing and investment, but also the kind of financial implications of that on the general fund and the HRA. Throughout the report, it also comments on the prudential indicators and kind of the performance against the prudential indicators this year in 22-23. Which we've not breached, and it also gives you the prospective prudential indicators going into next year around 24-25. Key indicators, as you know, are a key tool for ensuring kind of robustness in the system and the affordability of borrowing, and it's all kind of governed by the Prudential Code. It gives you also the opportunity to sort of see for any challenges or any emerging issues for us to address. Also within the report is the usual council's minimum revenue provision statement, which is kind of largely, it's kind of, we agreed it a few years ago basically, and it's just basically an update on that. One thing just to note there, that there is some statutory changes around there are some changes being consulted on with regards to the code that have MRP potential changes. So we're working through that at the moment, and that could have implications in terms of our financial projections going forward. That's something that our new head of investments with Rob Meldrum, as you know, we'll be picking up and looking at over the course of the next month or two. What else is there to say on that? I've given you a broad highlight and summary of that. And I think I did mention that we've not breached the prudential indicators this year. So yeah, I'm happy to take any questions on that. It's, like I said, it's a fairly standard report.
Yes.
That committee are hopefully familiar with seeing in terms of content.
Yeah. Okay. We take the Treasury Management Annual Report first. Yeah.
Chair.
Yes, Councillor Todd.
Yeah, well done, Rupert. Can I ask, have you got the report in front of you? I'm looking at page 54 and 55.
Right, bear with me.
Please, paragraph 422.
54, 55.
54, 55.
Yeah.
And I'm going to talk about Colo, Lambton Leisure, and others.
Yeah.
And I've had the benefit of looking at the audit report given by Mr. Pinder as to 3 reds. And here we are again, giving these entities loans. And at the end of paragraph 425, you're unable to quantify either the loan or the risk. You use a unique vocabulary, so I'll put my own interpretation on it. What is the problem about these companies? Why are they permanently lending?
Should I take that question? So I think, I'll take that into parts, Councillor Todd, because I think Mike's on the call anyway, and we'll run through the internal audit report with regards to Lambton internal audits. My understanding they're not largely around the Treasury management side of things. There are other there are other things that came out of their audits, which I'll let Mike cover as part of his internal audit update to you. In terms of the lending that Lambton are doing, that's all in alignment with the business plans that they put forward back in the spring 21, which I believe will be updated as part of their normal cycle of being updated. But I can take that one back, Councillor Todd, and find the exact timelines for that.
Paragraph 420, that there was an additional extension loan of 6 million. I mean, that's in the report. I hear what you're saying.
420.
Yeah. 423.
Sorry, my this is Lambton Leisure. Sorry, my computer's just a bit slow in getting to the actual.
This is Lambton Investment. The company requesting extension of the current loan.
It shouldn't be. I'm sorry. My apologies. It's my.
Don't worry. I'll skip you off the page if you want.
So my report's absolutely stuck on the page where it was at page 45. In terms of Lambton Investment, my understanding of that is it's not actually additional borrowing. It's in line with what their programme of spend was on the capital programme. So, but again, I can get Rob to give you a little bit more information in terms of what that planned programme spend looks like.
Okay. Can I ask you about Colo? Does it come under this umbrella?
Koalo.
Well, yeah, I can never say.
Doesn't quite, but I can see if I can help with a question on Koalo. Otherwise, I can absolutely take that back.
I see they've had disastrous losses. Is there any relationship between those losses and an increase in rent to tenants?
Okay, let me take that one back.
Okay.
Okay.
Not really. I'll take it back as a member query, Councillor Todd, and I'll come back to you on that.
Thank you, Chair. She's been very kind, Rupert, as ever. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry, Rupert, you will be informing all members of the answer, not just Councillor Todd, I hope.
Certainly not.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely. If you'd like the response back to all of you, that's fine. Yeah.
And perhaps you could put it into the minute as well, if that would be so kind. We do these things in public because there is a good reason. You know, we are here to hold the council to account in terms of its finances. And John's raised an excellent question, and I think members of the public shouldn't have to chase it themselves. If you put it into the minute, they'd know where to find it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll get that fed back. It's a service specific question, so I'll get that one back to you.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. I think the first there are various reports, and the bottom ones are for you to adopt, and the audit and governance will note the following recommendation. You agree those recommendations?
Sorry, Chair. Councillor Eason has indicated a desire to speak, and I certainly have a couple of questions I'd like to put to Rupert. It's great to have somebody who actually usually has her finger on the pulse of all questions that could be asked. So it's quite nice that she's just had what do you call those nasty balls that those Australians keep throwing at our guys, John? Googlies.
Okay, Councillor Denson, thank you. Agree. Now we go to item 6.
Sorry, Chair. Councillor Eason wishes to speak, and I indicated
Eason. Okay.
Yeah.
Councillor Eason.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Welcome the report. It is an annual fixture, and I'm not sure. I'm not spotting any significant changes in terms of what is being reported this year versus previous years, but I am a little disappointed that we don't have the lead member here to Councillor Rajawat to also ask to field any questions, and of course he would be expected to field such things at Cabinet and Borough Council. So
the opportunity to see him on many occasions. You are right.
Yeah. Well, I feel a little disappointed that he hasn't graced us with his presence, because obviously we won't have the opportunity to ask questions at Cabinet on this. But other than that, I'm seeing this as a fairly routine annual report, which is which I'll be happy to support.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Recommendations
Sorry,
agreed.
Chair, I still haven't had my little bite. I only spoke earlier on John's.
Come on. Yeah, all right.
I've only got one paragraph I'm going to query.
Okay. No. Because these finance reports is not on one occasion, and all this matter is okay.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I'm very sorry, Councillor Sharma, but Richard reminded me that our meeting was today. I in my head, I got it down for Friday, so I took the pleasure of the early hours of this morning to read this darn report. I'll be damned if I'm not going to ask a question on it. Just picking up on John's particular interest in paragraph 4.23, couple of things, and you're right, Councillor Easton, it would be useful having Councillor Rajawat here, because there is one thing that's distinctly missing from this report, which is the political perspective. One of the issues that concerns me, and John quite rightly raised it, is why do we keep lending money to organisations when we can't see the benefit of it? Or what is it that they're borrowing money for? Are they going further and further into the red? I made a clear statement on this when I was the lead member for finance, when a number of these companies were set up, which was that every single penny of borrowing to these organisations would be repaid back to the council. That was a political statement. I can understand why you're not repeating it, Rupert, but it ought to be repeated if the administration wants to stand by it. If it doesn't want to stand by it, then by all means let us know. But my view is that's the way it should be. Every single penny gets lent to these quasi-private, quasi-public organisations should be repaid, and we should know that that is the commitment made by our administration. So would it be possible for you, when this report goes on to wherever, that we encourage members to make that very clear and reassuring statement? And to be honest, John, my understanding, unless I've read the report incorrectly, is not because they're going into debt that they are borrowing money. It's because they don't have a capacity to borrow otherwise because of the nature of the organisations, and therefore we're financing their capital costs in order to get these companies into operation. And again, if I've got that one wrong, Rupert, please do tell me, and I'll worry about it a bit more. But
the balance sheet shows a loss, Louis.
No, I understand. So I'm not saying they're not showing a loss, but there's a difference between a revenue loss and a capital loan. And you're, of course, you're well aware of that. Okay, my issue actually relates to the 92 units on New York Road Triangle, and the statement in the second to the bottom line on 423, which is that, where's it gone? The properties developed to date and those in the immediate pipeline are expected to be sold early in the development, reducing the need for debt to finance building costs from previous estimates. To whom are these properties going to be sold? And why are they going to be sold? I thought the whole point about us setting up these two housing organisations was to build and buy and then provide, properties at non-market rent or sale to members of our community. The constant refrain in Sion Ward is, why are all these properties being built in this borough, but none of them are properties that I can rent or afford to buy? That's what people want to know, and that's what we should be able to tell them. And I don't understand why a single property is being sold if it is not being sold, in essence, into the HRA or for other means in order to provide homes that have been built to our residents who cannot currently afford to live in the areas they were brought up. Can you answer those three questions?
Thank you.
So sorry, Chair.
No, go ahead now.
So on your first point, Councillor Dennison, I think which you were referring to the political statement, I will obviously take that back and feed that information back. In terms of your comment regarding the property that's been sold and why, I've got to be honest, I don't have an answer to that. It's a colleague of mine's portfolio, and I will need to go back and actually get a response back to you on that one. My apologies, I just don't simply know the answer. So I will come back to you on that one.
Yeah, I'm grateful if you could, and perhaps if you're speaking to Councillor Rajawat with reference to the political statement, you could ask him to confirm that we are not selling properties back onto the private sector that we could otherwise rent out or sell at discounted rates to members of our own community.
Sorry, Chair, if I can interject, when Rupa makes a response, can she make it to all members of this committee?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah,
Okay.
sorry, apologies. I've just been notified that you can't actually see me, although my camera's on my side. Can you?
Yeah.
I can see you. Yeah.
No, we can see
Yes, yes. I
Okay,
can
fine.
see.
I was going to say it's on
Okay.
from my end. I just wanted to make sure you could. Okay.
We go now to item 6 again, Rupert. That's the statement of accounts update. I think
Yeah. So moving
79 to
on.
73.
So moving on to agenda item number 6. It starts on page 79 of your pack.
Yeah.
Just to let you know, we've got Mazars joining us on the call, our external auditors. So Suresh Patel is here as well. So basically, this report outlines where we're at with the statement of accounts audit for the financial year 21-22. Sorry, wrong year. I'm in current year mode, 2021. It outlines kind of where the audit's at, what audit findings have come out to date, kind of the audit adjustments arising. There are 2 accompanying appendices in the pack from Mazars, one for the main audit, one for the pension side of things, which go into more detail at the status of the audit and the key findings to date and the key adjustments that have been found and we've agreed to adjust for. Just to let committee members know that I did circulate this morning a update paper from kindly sent through from Mazars with a more up-to-date picture, because obviously at the time we reported at the time of publishing, which was straight after Christmas, which provides you a more fuller update as to where the audit's at, and I will go through all of that in detail shortly. So that's all in the pack and the papers at the moment. Where we're at the moment is there is still some audit work to be finalised and reviewed, which I'll let Suresh and Sheena touch on shortly. The ACR report, both on the pension fund side and on the main audit side, details a number of adjustments found by both on the officer side and the audit side, which we've worked through and agreed what we would adjust for. The update paper this morning highlighted a few additional adjustments that were coming through, and just because we'll get that published as well in terms of part of the pack, but just to kind of run through those, they were an adjustment around one of our investment properties and revaluing that upwards. There were some minor adjustments found on debtors and on a government grant and the treatment of that government grant, both a very small value, but obviously ones to still note for committee. And the third, I guess there's another area which I don't know how many committee members are aware of. During the pandemic, there was a lot of business rate support for businesses, but there were a handful of businesses that weren't entitled to support under the current way. So some of our offices, etc., in the borough were able to lodge appeals, which they did. So in our accounts that were prepared at year end, we did it on the basis of those appeals, because that was the right and factual to do so at the time. In December, government advised us that they'd passed some legislation to not uphold those appeals, and what they're doing is funding that through grants through the course of the year. So there would potentially be an adjustment to our appeals in the accounts for that, because it's an event that's happened after balance sheet date, but we're not proposing to change our accounts for that because of the value. And probably the final point to note is there's some work to be done around group accounts, which I'm sure Suresh will touch on shortly, but the work on some of our group accounts is still ongoing, certainly around kind of valuation of properties, which will affect our group statement and will need to be incorporated into our accounts once they land on that. But that's something on the Lambton side and the Lambton Mazars audit team. The report also touches, well, I'll let Suresh talk about kind of where they're at in the audit process and what's still to go. We are still hoping to sign the accounts off soon as we possibly can, well in advance of the March committee. So to that effect, the report notes to take comments back from committee members today, for you to note the adjustments and the findings that are in the ACR draft reports that are attached, to note the key findings to date that have been tabled this evening. And in light of all of that, we'll do the rest of the completion work over the course of the coming couple of weeks so that we can sign off those accounts, hopefully. Well, I'll let Suresh comment shortly, but hopefully in a few weeks' time, and we'll do that through a committee urgency decision action. I bring something back to committee by way of an update at that point, and then at the March committee. Overall, the auditor's conclusion, I'm anticipating an unqualified opinion based on the current audit work so far, but I don't know where. It's probably timely for me just to hand over to Suresh, I guess, so that he can give a quick update from his end, and then I can take, both of us can take questions at the end. If that's okay,
Thanks.
Chair.
Yeah. Can't we question you?
Yeah. Do you want to go, Chair?
No, I've just said Suresh Patel from the Mzaz. Is he here?
Okay. Yep, I am.
Is.
Can we have you first now?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Good evening to members of the committee.
Good evening,
I think
sir.
Rupert probably stole a lot of my thunder, actually, in terms of some things I'm going to say, so I'm clearly not going to repeat what she said, but I just wanted to highlight a couple of things about the audit, and also just introduce you to Sheena Phillips, who I think you might be able to see, but he's also on the call. She's the manager who's been looking after the audit, and she'll help me to respond to questions. First and foremost, let me just say thank you to Rupert and her team, particularly Rod, who have been positive throughout the audit, which is obviously beneficial for us, and we don't take it for granted, and have provided excellent cooperation to my team in order to get through the audit work that we needed to get through. I know it's not been an ideal timing of the audit, given obviously the catch-up from the prior year, and it's something I'm keen to ensure we avoid for 21-22, so we make sure the timetable fits in with Rupert and her team's availability far more effectively. Having said that, as she said, we are proposing an unqualified audit opinion, notwithstanding some of the issues or items, sorry, that we've still got to complete. You will see from the two reports that when they were dated, we issued those prior to the Christmas break. My intention was that we would complete the outstanding procedures between Christmas and sort of the first, second week of the new year. As I've referred to in my update, we have been impacted by some sickness absence relating to COVID. 2 or 3 members of the team actually were impacted, which meant they weren't able to complete the procedures that we wanted to. So we're probably a couple of weeks behind where we are. Having said that, within both reports, we've included a status of the audit page with some items that were either outstanding or subject to review. A lot of those have moved, so there's far less work that's actually outstanding and far less that is now subject to final review. So my anticipation is we complete our audit procedures and our final review procedures by the end of January, and I think that's achievable. In terms of the issues that we've reported, like I say, I won't go through those in detail, but it's fair to say some of those issues are common to a number of authorities in terms of the property valuations. The work that we now do on property valuations is quite granular and detailed and tends to identify issues. But it's pleasing to see that the council have taken on board our kind of comments. And there are some control points that we've also flagged. Some of those we've cleared from the prior year, which you'll see around bank reconciliations, for examples. But there are a couple of new ones, including elements on the pension fund. But overall, like I say, I am still proposing an unqualified audit opinion when we complete the final procedures in the next few weeks. Happy to take any questions.
Members, any questions to Mr. Suresh Patel, please? Councillor John Todd.
Yeah, nice to see you, Suresh. You've seen is the report that was circulated today yours or Rupert?
Yes, it is.
It's yours?
Yeah.
Okay. I want to go down to the business rates appeals provision. Just to remind you, I'm a member of the opposition and I'm against increasing council tax. So whilst you say at the bottom, we're not going to adjust these, I'm going to try and persuade you to do otherwise. But as a non-accountant, explain to me your statement that the appeals provision of 10.3 million is overstated by 3.4 million. Does that mean we've got that additional money to use and reduce our council tax or not?
I'll let Rupert maybe answer the council tax impact, but from an accounting point, what we're saying is that you've in your draft account you've provided 10.3 million for appeals, business rate appeals that you will probably lose and have to in effect pay out. Some of that includes the expectation when you prepared your accounts that some businesses will be able to claim against the material change of circumstances because of COVID, the 3.4 million.
Do you mind if I stop and ask you my question? Yeah, is there some spare
because the
money
legislation in December said that actually that material change of circumstances won't apply, that 3.4 million is no longer required as a provision.
You've asked me. And how are debtors overstated?
So which point are you talking about now?
One above, it says debtors are potentially overstated by £1 million.
So
that's the word potentially.
Yeah, so the potential is because we, so the way we carry out our audit work on debtors, because clearly it's a large balance and thousands of transactions, is we pick a sample of your year-end debtors to verify that they are indeed year-end debtors. In doing that work, we identified, I think it was 2 with a total value of 54,000 that you couldn't support that they were debtors. So we then we consider whether or not that's an isolated error, and we couldn't get evidence to support that. So we extrapolate that error that we found in the sample over the whole population, which comes out at the 1 million. So that's why we're saying it's a potential overstatement, because it's our extrapolation rather than an actual error.
Thanks, Suresh. And my final point, you've been very helpful. The Western International Market Valuation. Is there any spin-offs from there? Would there be an obligation for us to pay more business rates if they were applicable? Are there any additional liabilities on that additional valuation or not? Or is that just a statement of value?
I might have to Rupert to pick up that.
Yeah, it's a statement. It's a valuation for the entire site as a whole, Councillor Todd. So no, it wouldn't be. And their long-term leases. I say long-term, they're not like very, very short-term leases there, hence why the valuation's kind of where it's at. But no, I don't. My understanding is it won't have necessarily implications on the business rate side of things, but I might need to just go back and double check that one to be absolutely certain.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Rupert.
Thank you. Anybody else? Or Councillor Denson and then Councillor Eason.
Thank you, Chair. Would I be right, Suresh, in thinking that the provision for the appeals that John's making reference to is a one-off provision rather than an ongoing provision? We may have it every single year, but it's not the same money every single year, or is it the same money?
Yes. Sorry, I've just I can take that question if you like, Councillor Dennison, because I've just realised that we didn't quite answer Councillor Todd's full question there. So it's a provision that we assess at the end of every year. It's a provision against appeals, business rates appeals lodged. There is an element of those that are lodged, those that are threats that we take a judgment against, and the auditors obviously assess our judgment against that. We obviously reassess that every year based on regular data that we get from a third party on the list, and B, the likelihood of that, if that makes sense. So we do a reassessment of that, not just at year end. We've actually got practices now to do it regularly throughout the year to continually look at our appeals provisions. So it is something that's reviewed regularly, but certainly in terms of our accounts is reviewed at year end.
Yes, and therefore, yes, there's a one-off saving that is not required this year, but that doesn't mean there's a one-off saving that occurs in future years at all. So, John's disappeared.
It's also it's probably good to add that it is also ring-fenced to the collection fund, so you don't necessarily see the impact of that flowing through to the statement in that year. In any case, it flows through, as you know, the general fund has a year lag in terms of rates and council tax.
Yeah, no,
it's further complicated by the fact that the business rates income that you receive isn't quite straightforward as what you collect, you keep. We obviously share across to central government. Yeah.
I'm sure these are all things that John is fully aware of, and therefore would accept my caution. Please don't use this in order to cut the council tax. I do not believe there is anybody on this council who is more committed to cutting the council tax than I am. That's not my ideological position. That's a purely practical one. And the reason why I've always opposed increasing the council tax, unless there's a damn good reason, is my very first job in Hounslow was giving benefits advice to bloody poor people. And council tax and the performer rates and the community charge were all superbly regressive taxes that impact harshest on those least able to pay. I'm not trying to save money of the leafy suburbs of our borough. I'm concerned about those households for whom £5 a week makes a big difference. And I would love to see a cut in the council tax, as I'm sure you would too, John. But it has to be done only if it is appropriate and prudent to do so. And I would absolutely abhor the idea that we could fund a council tax cut on, say, the basis of cutting council tax reduction scheme for the poorest households in our borough, as was suggested last year. That would be, I think, abhorrent, particularly given the circumstances that many of our poorer residents actually face. My actual question, though, was actually with reference to the use of the urgency procedure, Rupert. I understand you can use it, and to us, when in the good old days, Jagdish, do you remember when I worked for Hounslow Council? I was much more biddable then, but in the good old days, we used to casually use the urgency procedure because we need to do it in a certain time lag. My view has always been, as an ex-Hounslow Council officer, that urgency has a specific meaning, and a report that is actually late, as this one is, isn't suddenly urgent months after we expected to have agreed it. It's absolutely not urgent. So why are we using the urgency procedure? What makes it urgent, given that you've planned to have this urgent decision into the future? It can't be the case that it's urgent if you're planning to use the urgency procedure.
Okay, so in response to that question, for me, it's all about the timeliness of getting these statement of accounts out to the public and actually of use. It's already delayed, as you know, and it's not really ideal to be publishing it this late in any case. To delay it to then what might be early April, when we're already into a 22-23 year, is something that obviously we don't ideally want to do. Obviously we take a view as to where we're at. I believe the majority of all the audit work is now complete. I don't expect there to be anything material or significant that comes out now that hasn't been reported this evening. So it's on that grounds that I feel that committee have had a thorough update as to what's come out of the audit and what those adjustments look like, that I'd welcome your comments back on, and that if we can then build those into the statement of accounts and get those published. So I guess where I'm at is I don't really want to delay it up until April to publish a set of accounts to the public, because we have to wait for a March committee to take place.
But that's using the urgency procedure as a matter of convenience, not a question of urgency. And again, I think my view is that, if it was urgent, I would entirely endorse it. But given that it's not actually urgent, I don't actually think it's an appropriate use of that procedure.
Well, I mean, legally, obviously, I know it's I know it's in our constitution. Legally, I know that we can do this. Obviously, I've taken Rachel's advice before even presenting it as an option, but obviously I will take away your comments, Councillor Denison. But in my view, I do believe if we've got a set of accounts that's pretty much over the line and publishable because they're ready to go, it would seem sensible to be able to publish them as a final set of accounts for stakeholders to be able to view and access.
Yeah, I do absolutely understand that. I think my view, though, and coming back on something that Suresh was actually saying earlier, my view is it was urgent when it was not going to make the original deadline. That is when additional resourcing should have been put in to ensure that it was brought back on deadline, not brought back 6 months after the deadline, brought back on deadline or as near as we could humanly make it. And I think I'm slightly concerned about the casual attitude that we've taken to this year's accounts, which I don't think should have been late. And I certainly am taking umbrage at the idea that next year's accounts might be late, Suresh. We haven't closed them yet, but Why on earth are you now projecting that we are going to be late with those? It shouldn't be, keen to avoid. It should be under no circumstances will we have late accounts next year. That's what a tight-run, well-managed ship ought to operate. Mazars is a fine company. Hounslow is the best council in Britain. There's no excuse for not having these things done on time. And if we can't do it on time, then we shouldn't go around trumpeting how fine we are.
Can I just clarify, Chair, just a point there, when I was talking about avoiding the timing issues, I wasn't saying that it's going to be late, as in the new deadline is end of November. I was saying I wanted to avoid Rupert's finance team's busy period.
I
So,
also agree with
we are keen to make sure and it will be done by the end of
There is
November.
no reason. Thank you. Carry on.
And can I just add something there as well, Chair, for Councillor Denison? We are working very, very closely with Mazars this year to try and tighten up the processes around timing and deliverability. So we will seek to make improvements next year on that. None of us want to be doing this late. I certainly don't, as you know. I'm already starting 21-22 closing procedures now as I'm wrapping up 21-22. So none of us want to be in this. I'm in budget setting, etc. So we are working very closely together to try and tighten up that process so that we can try and achieve that. But obviously, that's something that we'll continue to strive and improve.
Okay, thank you. I think Councillor Denison now is thinking now there is no point to labor much on this point at all now.
I'm happy to accept the fact that we are where we are, Chair, but
yes,
do I think it's acceptable? No, I don't. But, I'm not going to criticise people who work really hard. I'm just saying it's urgent 6 months ago, not now.
Consolation.
Thank you. I welcome the fact that we're in a more positive position than we were 12 months ago with the previous accounts. And I very much welcome the commitment that we'll get this year's accounts done this year, so by November. And so really looking forward that will be achieved. Just a few particular points on the investment property valuation. Could I just understand what that had previously been? My perception is that it had been down valued to 34 million and then has probably maybe come back up to a value that was similar to pre-pandemic. So that was one question. And then a second one from the update document today. The last one about the group accounts says Lambton 360 Limited, year ending 31st of December 2020. Is that balance date actually right? That we have a different balance dates for some of the Lambton companies than for the council itself? And if we do, I'd like to understand that a bit more, because I think that starts to introduce some additional risks where you've got differences between in balance dates. Looking at the significant findings, and again, we might get to discuss this a bit more when the final report comes in March. But on page 98, we've got infrastructure and vehicle plant equipment assets that have not been depreciated since 2013-14. And right, we've got values in the 16.3 million, 12.5 million for this period. So it's below the accounts thresholds, I think. But I'd like at some point for us to understand a bit more about what that says about some of our systems and processes. And whether we need to get additional resource into getting things working smoothly in that area. And then somewhere there was internal control, page 105, deficiency there about the annual declaration of interest by members. A statement that we've identified 13 out of 60 members did not complete a return or submit an annual declaration of interest form. So I probably wanted to understand a bit more about how we've let that happen, because for virtually all members, I think that is a nil return unless we're trading with the council in or our related parties are trading with the council. So that feels a little bit sloppy if we've got basically a fifth of our councillors not having returned the form. I think we need to work through that, and we'll get we shouldn't be having that sort of thing coming up. And then again, perhaps a bit more of a detailed discussion later is the bank reconciliation. I know that there's been issues, and that's been an internal control point for a couple of years, and that we've been working through resolution there. I'm not clear from the report yet whether we're actually coming out the other side of that, whether we've actually got that all sorted, or whether that's something which again needs some additional attention. I think those were my questions and comments. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. Anybody else?
Chair, do you want me to respond? I guess, Councillor Easton, do you want me to respond to any of those now, or do you want me to respond back to the committee as a whole afterwards? I know you made reference to bringing it back in March, but
I think if there are any quick answers on those, and then then other points. I believe that we get the final audit completion report back in March, and I suppose I was flagging up what I'd looking for what I'd be looking for in that report,
Fine, I can do some quick high-level answers then in that case now, and then bring something back a bit fuller with the audit completion report in March. So WIM valuation, I'll need to just double check what it was in the year prior to last year, so pre-pandemic, to see what it dropped, whether it did drop down, or kind of where the 35 million at the start of this year sat. So I'll have to come back to you on that one anyway, Councillor Easton. I suspect it was probably slightly lower, but I will come back. I say slightly low. It's done on rental yield of those leases there, so I know they're fixed. So can't imagine it being too different. What has created the kind of change in the valuation is the assumption that was taken by our valuers in doing that valuation was on the assumption that they'd taken, with it being the type of customers that are in there, store holders, that it was short-term lets, where in fact actually it's longer term. It was a longer term time frame than they'd appreciated. So having built that into the mix, and along with inflation and some of the other factors they take into consideration to do the valuation went up. So that's we can write a fuller answer to that. That's basically the summary of the WIM valuation, which has gone across to Mazars, and I understand Mazars' own property valuer, because they've got their own independent valuation officers there, have looked at that and are happy with that basis. In terms of group accounts, I'll have to come back to you on. I can't unless Suresh knows. I can't remember what the year-end date is.
I think it is a December year-end.
A December date. I'm guessing that might be the case because they filed company accounts in January too. So that's confirmation that. Depreciation. So we've done a lot of work around cleansing. You'll know from the last couple of years, certainly since I've been reporting to Audit and Governance Committee, we've done a lot of cleansing around our asset database system. And some of this is the tail end of some of that in terms of those properties that were held at historic cost. In terms of depreciation, that's something that was in the system already and has been there for a little while, and we probably should have seen that a little while ago, and that the flag for depreciation wasn't set for those. We are actually looking at our properties kind of assets for management system at the moment in terms of its capabilities and what it does and doesn't do. So we're taking on board some of these things that we've spotted that are either human or system things that could be tightened and improved to take that forward. Annual declaration of members, something I've flagged with the Democratic Services team already. It's an annual exercise that we do in April. You'll all know because you all get the form to send and submit back, but we'll take that appropriately forward through the Democratic Services team. And the bank reconciliation is something I'll give you an update in March on, but work has been ongoing on this in terms of improvement, and we've been able to bottom out quite a bit of the differences that are in there. Some of it is historic, so we're kind of getting there, but there's still a bit of work to be done. Some of those transactions were quite manual in some respects, system driven, but quite manual in terms of our cash management system, not so much our financial system. We've done a lot of work this year to try and automate some of those processes, so it takes away the risk of human error, etc. So there has been work on that front to progress the bank rec. I'm hoping certainly by the new year that we've got a much better process in place around the bank reconciliation. But we've got a very complex system in terms of a complexity of our income streams is not typical of a private sector organisation in the way that we collect and our different income streams that we collect against. The systems work quite differently. We've got a number of systems in Hounslow, but I hope that answers it in brief for now. I'm more than happy to kind of provide a more thorough update for March.
Thank you, Rupa. Thanks very much. Anybody else?
Yeah, Colo's misspelt on page 94.
94.
Noted.
All right.
Chair,
Okay,
Chair.
thank you very much. I think now item 6, the
Hi,
recommendation details are on page 79.
Chair.
If you want me to read all that, I can read, but after reading
Chair.
all that, I'll say,
Chair.
Excuse me,
know.
Chair. Hi, could I just
Yes.
come back quickly on the annual return, just quickly
Yes,
to
yes.
just address Councillor Easton's point, just to say
Yeah.
that yes, this has been noted, and I've already been in discussion with Thomas about a new escalation process that we'll put in place for this. To where members don't return, then it will come to myself, and I will personally follow it up. So just to provide some assurance that yes, I've seen it, and yeah, there is a plan in place to address this. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Rachel. Okay, now we go to item 7. If you go to page 174, and the report is about the Financial Management Code assessment.
Yeah, that's one of my reports. Thank you, Chair. So it's on page 174 of the pack is a report. This is the first time this has come to any kind of first time it's been presented in the council and to members. It's so many of you will be aware that CITFA introduced a CITFA financial management code back a couple of years ago. Part of that CITFA financial management code required councils to look at themselves internally and assess themselves against assess themselves against code. So the code basically has within there a series of principles, and within those principles a series of standards to kind of review and assess ourselves against. The principles are generally around kind of leadership, kind of accountability, the financial management within the organisation, our financial sustainability and our long-term financial sustainability, and what we do around kind of assurance in terms of monitoring assurances around that. So this is a code requirement to do a self-assessment against this. It's a code requirement to be in full compliance by by the end of 21-22. We've gone through a process as officers to kind of look at that, assess ourselves against that. What's attached to the report is an appendix that kind of provides a little bit more detail in terms of the principles, the standards, expectations, and what we've got in place. And the report itself kind of touches on that on a high level. Within there is the Chief Financial Officer's comments on this. Basically, it outlines where we're at, and as a council where we are financially stable, our financial management processes are in place. It basically touches on value for money as well, so there's a value for money angle in there. What the assessment does is basically lays out what we've got in place, and we've deemed ourselves as being kind of in compliance, but notwithstanding that, there's always areas and room for improvement. So what we've tried to do with this is kind of add in there what actually next steps might look like in terms of that continual improvement to improve what we've got in place. So the final column on that self-assessment grid kind of gives you kind of a flavour of what we think we'll take, what next steps we will take in terms of that continuous improvement on a continuous improvement journey. This is in here because it's something that we're required to do, and it's something that will get reflected in our annual governance statement every year. So you'll be familiar that there's an annual governance statement that we prepare and publish every year. Mike Pinder will need to incorporate within that. Basically, this is part of our assurance framework of what we're doing. And going back to early discussions this evening, it is all about that kind of that continual assurance of kind of where we're at and actually improving on that financial management journey. I think I've probably explained it as best as I possibly can. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. I think anybody wants to ask any question?
Yes, Chair. Yeah, Rupert, that's very helpful. I have a query. You have a board which oversees capital expenditure.
Yeah.
I look in page 175 and 176 at the top. It says, shows evidence of periodic officer action and elected member decision making. Yeah. When do the elected members give the decision making on the revenue accounts and set the parameters?
Revenue or capital? Sorry, you started
revenue. Off. The capital has a board which meets. How do you decide the revenue?
Okay, so the capital strategy board in itself, Councillor Todd, doesn't have decision making powers, so to speak. So
it will be naughty, Rupert.
The capital strategy that's coming along with the budget report will obviously give you more detail around the capital strategy board, but it doesn't have full extent of making decision making powers on the capital programme. It is there to do various roles around.
Well, it's oversight, isn't it?
It's oversight of the capital programme. Yes. Okay. Yeah.
So someone says yes and someone says no.
What around the?
Yeah, but this is an officer board. It's not a member board.
I understand that, Theo. Yeah. But it talks about, you always say it's a member-led authority.
I don't.
Every time I ask a question of finance, I'm told to speak to the finance staff. I'm not quite sure. So let me please get some simple clarification on a winter's night. Yeah. Okay. But who oversees the revenue? What little board or club oversees the revenue?
Internal monitoring and management and review of revenue budgets is done through the corporate leadership team. If that simply answers it. So the equivalent of the capital strategy board that focuses on capital is done through the leadership team. And in fact, members on the capital strategy board are leadership team. Sorry, I've just lost you. Can you still see me? Yeah. Members on the capital strategy board are a combination of officers. So they are some corporate leadership team members, some corporate leadership team officers, but also officers on the ground delivering those projects. So okay. The director of
That's very helpful. My little supplementary, if I could, Chair. Yeah, I see you're carrying forward £25 million capital again, not to use. How should I interpret that? Poor management, poor oversight, poor projects. What?
The capital slippage, Councillor Todd.
Yes.
It's been a tricky
second year running.
Councillor Todd should know that there are many reasons for the slippage of this capital expenditure.
I know.
It always happens. When you were there, you also had this capital slippage. Yes, you had.
Yeah, but we've moved on now, Councillor Sharman. We have a dynamic leader now and a team that are converting the world. Yeah.
Okay.
So that has probably got several contributing reasons behind it, Councillor Todd. As you know, capital in itself will naturally have slippage. So it's the nature of the work. It overlaps many years. It's kind of inbuilt as part of the programme. Obviously, last year and this year we had the pandemic. Obviously, has not not both just internally but externally in terms of delivery. We have seen an impact on that. Suppliers and materials, etc., sourcing those. Okay, so there are various contributing reasons for some of that slippage.
And on behalf of the 58 members of the council who are not accountants, your paragraph 5.5 say you're going to introduce understandable data. Is there anything that you propose to do that will make thickos like me understand the accounts a bit better or not?
I'm sorry, is that in the what page is that on? Sorry, Councillor Todd.
I'm on page 175.
Sorry, apologies, I couldn't.
Which paragraph is that?
It's the last line on page 175.
So this is what the code outlines. Basically, this is pick and drop from what the code is expecting councils to try and I probably should have added the code's not prescriptive. It's prescriptive to the extent it gives you what they want you to do, but it asks you to use your judgment, because obviously there's a bit of localization in some of this, and I think I reflect that in one of the paragraphs. Let me just see which paragraph it's in.
Okay. You've been very kind. Thanks very much.
Paragraph 5.4, just preceding it. So it's there. They do want you to do it, but it's about actually just looking at the financial health of your organisation. And obviously there are examples in there of best practice, but obviously what you do at each local authority might do things slightly differently. So in terms of making accounts more readable for the users, which is something that's a bit of a bugbear of mine as well, because they're a big meaty document. It takes a long time to pull together as well. We're governed a little bit by that from SITFA themselves and SITFA code around that. So I know there's a continual work stream between local authorities and SITFA with the auditors. I don't know if Suresh is still online, he maybe not, but there is a continual dialogue between relevant parties and groups that have an interest in this to try and streamline accounts and make them more readable to the user. And although some improvements have been made with SITFA on that front, there's still it's still work in process and some to be made. We have liaised with the auditors over the past 2 to 3 years to try and streamline our accounts the best we possibly can. But always looking to make improvements, as you know, on some of that to make it more accessible. But bound by the code, there are certain disclosures that we have to present in certain ways, and I have a bit of flexibility, but not massive amounts.
Thank you very much, Steve. Ruben, you've been very helpful. Thank you, Chair.
Okay.
Chair, before we continue, can I just ask that we somebody moves a resolution to suspend standing orders, because we're coming up to the 2.5 hours.
Yes.
Councillor Todd.
Councillor Dennison first, then Councillor Todd.
Well, Councillor Todd has moved that. I noted it, Chair, and Councillor Eason was seconding that motion, and I'm sure we all agree. Yeah, just a couple of things. Number one, John, you might want to have a look at the report that went to council at our last meeting, which had a very significant report at that meeting on capital spend and slippage, which you might find particularly interesting. I was particularly disappointed to miss the opportunity to actually yawn on about that myself at that meeting. It was, I don't think members were that keen to discuss it, but it was a very interesting report, and it did show that while there was slippage, there was some attempt to make use of the the money that was then released, which again, it's capital, not to be used by you to cut the council tax, because it's a one-off sum, not a recurring sum. Couple of things I wanted to. Sorry, John, I can't hear you. You're cussing quietly.
I would never curse at a fellow member. I think you're allowing your political license to get away with you. Even I know the difference between capital and revenue now after 16 years. I think I can spell it too.
Yeah, no. To be honest, I have to confess, John, that I was actually taught the difference between capital and revenue by Conservative councillors after hours and hours of rate capping meetings in London local authorities. So I'm very grateful for your party to actually have taught me that.
You've had a very interesting career, Theo. We've watched it with interest. Yeah.
Indeed, well, yeah, haven't we all? Okay, couple of things, Rupert. Did I hear you misspeak? I'm pretty certain there are no councillors on the Capital Strategy Board. Is that not correct?
There are no councillors.
There is.
That's right. So when I was talking about members, I was actually talking about there are no members.
Oh, sorry, I was talking about members attended.
Yes.
Yeah, sorry, no, it's an officer-led board. It's got no members.
It's officer-led. It's not just officer-led, Rupert. It's an officer full stop board.
Officer, yeah.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. The other point, which you may therefore be of interest, John, is therefore in terms of oversight of the capital process. That's not a member level oversight of the capital process, and you can draw your own conclusions as a consequence of that. And bizarrely, I do recall that the current leader of the council on at least 2 occasions attempted to abolish the Capital Strategy Board in the 2 previous iterations of its name and 2 iterations of its purpose, because officers were taking decisions on the capital budget and not letting members have a say in it. It's a bit of a stitch up, Rupert, and I know we know you are all competent and a hell of a lot more competent than us members, but there is meant to be within the local government process some degree of oversight by members of the council, and it will be quite interesting to be able to ask the lead member for finance, who should have been overseeing this report coming to this committee, who could have said, oh, what degree of oversight does he have? Precious little. It just happens that way. The other point that John makes, which I think is a really important one, and you make reference, Rupert, to the idea that capital schemes will naturally, they will slip. Well, for us, not only was I a former Hounslow Council officer, but again, as Jagdish will confirm, my missus was the capital strategy coordinator in the Leisure Services Department. And as a consequence of that, I do know.
Not CIP.
No. In the old Leisure Services Department, we're talking about decades ago, John, before you were born, probably. But either way, she was the capital strategy coordinator for that department with the redoubtable Sue Pritt, who wouldn't let anybody slip anything at all. And the way they would avoid slippage on the capital programme, or at least an underspend on the capital programme, is through a device called over-programming. So while they might have £100 million worth of capital schemes, they would budget as if they had £150 million worth of capital schemes. So their spend came in at 100, despite the fact there had been slippage on some of the schemes. So they kept the spend up by, in essence, over-program, by almost like over-budgeting. Whereas we appear to have got to a system now where we have tightened up what we're doing with the financing of the scheme, but not tightened up the progress on the capital schemes themselves. And the point I was going to make at council when it last met, and I'm sorry to now come back on history, was there is a cost. I'm very keen on, as you know, prudent finances, but prudence has got to be for a purpose. And one of the things that the capital strategy delivers are key assets, key resources for the community and for the council to deliver stuff. And if we don't maintain a good spend on our capital programme, we're not doing ourselves a service. It's in essence an underinvestment in our community. And there are consequences of doing that, which is why I was pleased that there was at least some attempt shown in that report to the last council meeting to increase spend in order to bring the actual spend up to the original budgeted spend. There shouldn't be underspending on the capital programme. It needs to be better managed to ensure that we maximise the benefits that capital programme gives to our borough. And I think that's the point I wanted to make.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I agree with him.
Thank you, John.
If I take back out the 174 is the recommendation, agreed? It's to note again. Now we go to the next item is quarter 2 audit and investigation performance report. It's Mike Pinder.
Thank you, Chair. I'll interrupt the Rupa show very briefly. So we've got the my usual update, and as you'll have seen in the table at 5.4 pages 198 to 202, we report back on the performance against the plan. During the period, we completed 7 reports, 2 of which were limited assurance reports, and I set out a little bit more detail on those for members. We then move on to talking about the performance against the plan overall. Pleased to say at quarter 2 we'd expected to do 40%, 42% of the plan, and we've done 48% of the plan. So we're slightly ahead and on target to complete the plan within the financial year. Over the page on 204, we talk about the follow-ups. I'm pleased to report on number 1. I brought that one back to you to say that it has actually now been implemented after several years of bringing it back to you. It's nearly been done. And the status on the other recommendations is also provided there. I think number 2 we have now confirmed has been done, and we're continuing to follow up on the others, and we'll report back. Finally, just an update, our usual update on the proactive and reactive investigation work. So to report, there are 9 sanctions for the year to date. As I indicated to you last time, we've changed the way we report back on right to buys, so it's a little bit skewed. But I think we're making good progress on what was a difficult start to the year with some of the fraud stuff, and we're really getting back into getting out there and tracking some of these properties down. Any questions?
Question?
Yes, please.
Yes. Where are you?
Mike, John Todd, sorry.
Yeah.
Can you see me, Mike? Mike, you're looking the other way. You're not looking at me. Okay. Thanks for your comprehensive report as ever. You kindly sent me 2 reports. One was the Lambton one, and one was climate emergency. Can you tell me who did the Lambton investigation? I thought it was very well done, and it made some significant, I would say, criticisms. Are you happy you've addressed all the weaknesses in that empire?
So, sorry, members. I think just to obviously not everybody requested the report. We shared the report as it was requested by Councillor Todd. So what we do is we set out a scope, and the scope of that one was to actually review the council side monitoring arrangements. So it looked at how the council monitors Lambton, how it gets the information out of Lambton to give it self-assurance on how that works. So I think it's more focused on how the council's arrangements for monitoring. So that report identified the need for more detailed service level agreements. So obviously the council is providing some of the services back to Lambton. And those are in place. It doesn't mean things aren't happening, but just actually formalising those arrangements. So work's underway to agree some of those bits and pieces. And that's so. I mean, there was work to do, but I think what we'd seen was that it progressed significantly since the previous time we looked at how the council monitored its council-owned companies.
Okay, thank you very much, Steve. Mike, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I wouldn't mind just a short bite on page 198, item 4, the capital programme delivery and programme management capacity. On that item, I note it's still work in progress. Is the issue that John raised in terms of slippage being addressed in that, in terms of whether we can actually do something about maximising benefits from the capital programme?
I'm not sure we'll be able to address the slippage through the audit, but we will.
I'm not suggesting you could stop the slippage. I entirely accept Rupert's point that these things are almost unavoidable. But the point about it, given that we know that this happens, is why is our spend on the capital programme less each year and has been consistently and very dramatically less than that which we are budgeting for? Because the consequence of that, as I reported earlier, is that there is a loss in terms of assets not created to this borough.
So I believe we will be talking to them about the monitoring arrangements and how they kind of identify those things. And say just because of slippage, it doesn't mean there's a control weakness. I.e., you could be doing everything to avoid those slippages, so it won't necessarily identify a weakness. But I take on your point, and I'll make sure that through the audit we're considering that and discussing with management. And obviously, as we come to report back. We will flag any
opinion, really, though, isn't it, Mike? In the sense that, you know, if I had a gear stick that when I put it into first actually went into second, but it reliably, you know, when I put it into second, it goes into third. When I put it into third, it goes into fourth. You know, there's no weakness there. It's clearly working, but not quite as intended. And when we set a budget of 100 million, but we spend 50, because the gap between our capital budget and our capital spend is as dramatic as that. Not necessarily quite in percentage terms, but certainly we're talking about tens of millions of pounds underspent each year. Given that, you know, should we not recalibrate the budget so that we actually deliver what we want to deliver, maximise what we're trying to deliver, not simply pretend that something's going to happen when we know, as Rupert just said, that inevitably slippage happens.
Yeah, no, I take on board fully what you're saying. I'm not trying to belittle it. I'm just saying that sometimes, actually, you know, some of the biggest problems in the council have the best management framework around it. And it's very difficult sometimes from an audit. I mean, I've looked at contracts, which I know are a car crash, not necessarily even at here. And it's actually, you know, they've done all the escalation processes. They've got, you know, the chief execs, the managing directors, calling them all to account. And you're looking at it from a contract management perspective, and it's good, but actually from the council's perspective, it's not working as expected. So, like I say, we will consider that and try and make sure it's built into the work and report back.
I'm very grateful, Mike. As I say, traditionally, and again, it was before you were born. There was a mechanism for dealing with the underspend on capital, the capital programme, by, in essence, over-programming, and it was not a naughty, tricksy, naughty thing to do, as Jagdish will absolutely concur. I mean, Jagdish would never put up with a thing that wasn't appropriate. It was just the way that we maximised the benefit from having that capacity to borrow, you know, which is unique to us. We're nothing like as able to do that if you're in the private sector, but we have unique access to cheap money to borrow. And when we have that access and the opportunity to do good within the borough through the capital programme, it is something we should be spending a little bit more time and effort on. And in defence of the leader, who I often do not defend, in his attitude about scrapping the Capital Strategy Board, you know, the problem with the Capital Strategy Board has consistently been its refusal to accept political leadership of its actions. And I think if there was a little bit more insight into what it was getting up to, people will be asking, well, why don't you do this as well? And at the moment, we're not doing that. Anyway, I'm very grateful. I indicated earlier, Chair, that I'd have to leave early, and I'm afraid that time has now come. So bless you all and enjoy the rest of the meeting.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, dear.
Yes.
Okay, now we go to last item. The agenda is external audit appointment.
Thank you, Chair.
That's you again.
That's me again. I seem to have dominated quite a lot of the agenda this evening. Page 209 of your pack has a fairly short report in there around external auditor appointments.
196.
Sorry, have I got the wrong page number? Sorry. Yeah, page 209. So
Yeah.
this report's come into committee because under the current legislation act, this is all governed by legislation. We have to go about appointing our auditors, which at the moment, as you know, is under the PSA, which is an external body. It's under a contract framework with them for 5 years. That comes to an end at the end of 22-23. So current year's audit will be under that framework, next year's audit will be under that framework, but thereafter we will need to have gone through a process to appoint some new auditors. Basically, there are 3 options that are open to us under the legislation, which are outlined in the report. Procure ourselves independently, procure more locally, independently again, but more likely with other local authorities, or continue under the arrangement of procuring under the PSAA framework. The report goes into detail around each of those options, what they would entail, obviously the pros and cons of each, the kind of limitations of each option. And towards the end of the report, it tries to summarise kind of each of those options and proposes a recommendation on what we do next in terms of our audit appointments. Probably just want to highlight that although it's not like the private sector where you can just go out and procure someone off the market. The Act governs kind of processes that you need to kind of go through. There are kind of implications of doing it independently in that you have to have an auditor panel that's independent and does other kind of provision of challenge, etc. So the simple option of just going independently obviously comes with a little bit more kind of complexity with it. The report also touches on the Redmond Review, just as a reminder there, but more importantly, I think the report touches on that there are obviously still issues with kind of within the sector around audit provision and kind of audit provision, enough providers out in the market, and actually audit deliverability and audit fees and the framework around audit just generally in terms of what the code of practice requires from the auditors as well. And those things aren't going to go away, whichever option kind of we kind of go ahead with. So yeah, basically that the report outlines the 3 options and summarises those, and it makes a recommendation for us to go with the 3rd option of through the PSAA again. That, just for committee members to note, doesn't mean that we are able to pick our auditors, but we certainly can feed back into a process that kind of take on board basically some of our comments back. So we'll obviously need to feed back if we go ahead with that recommendation around our local arrangements around internal audit, so that we have a bit more, I guess, a bit more option on the table in terms of our external audit work versus internal audit work.
Thank you.
Happy to take any questions on that.
Any question on that? Yes, Councillor Easton.
John. Richard, please.
Yeah. Thank you. I've read this report with interest, particularly reflecting on the discussions we've had over the last couple of years about delays in the external audit work. Yeah, in the absence of sort of appetite from other boroughs to do something collectively for London, I sort of concur that the option 3, continuing with PSAA, is the least worst of the options. Yeah, so concurring with the report with a little bit of reluctance, but an understanding that the market it doesn't give us that, but it doesn't really support other options. Yeah.
Anybody else? John? Councillor Todd?
Chair, you finished, Richard?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Chair.
I simply wanted to say, if you are thinking, I'll second that Councillor Rees's motion that we go for recommendation number 3.
Okay, do you mind if I speak, Chair?
Sure, now.
Yeah, okay. Members may not be aware that the Financial Reporting Council, I think that's what it's called, have recently fined Mazards. I think it was £250,000, wasn't it, Rupen?
I can't remember the exact sum, but it was a.
You'd agree they were fined.
Yeah,
They were
fined. Yeah, they were sanctioned. They was fined. Yeah.
They were fined because of their poor property valuation work. Now I can't comment on that. The only comment you and or Clive have made is that this new partner, Mr. Patel, is much better than the previous incumbent, and there seems to be a teamwork between you both. Only you can answer that question. But it doesn't matter. I felt the committee should be aware of that penalty, which is significant. It's a public retribution, and seek your guidance, if that's the right expression, as to whether we should seek the go as Richard recommends, but ask for another firm.
Yeah. Do you want me to respond to that first, Chair, before Councillor Mann's question? So noted, Councillor Todd, and it is out in the public domain. Mazars did, I mean, we were all aware, I think last summer, hopefully, that they were under some scrutiny from FRC in terms of their audit quality, and that obviously led to a sanction this year. It was around their kind of public sector arm of their business, is what I understand, albeit I don't know how widely how widely known it is in terms of kind of which clients, etc. What I would say is, and I can comment on it, we've had a very good productive relationship with the auditors this year in terms of the audit process, and it's been quite good working with Suresh because he's got a real oversight of timetable, etc. And actually what the audit requirements are. I've seen although painful for officers because it's quite time intensive and resource intensive, I can hand on heart say that they've tested things like PPE very thoroughly. Part of that is probably learning from practices internally, and some of that learning, possibly part of that is also there was changes around the National Audit Office's code of practice in terms of the quality of their work that they should be doing around that area. So I think it's a bit of a combination of both, but I have seen some of that come through this year in terms of the audit work that they've done, Councillor Todd. So feedback from me this year is it's been pretty positive. In terms of requests going back about change of auditors, my understanding is when we go back into this framework for the next retendering process, it will all get shuffled up anyway. I can't say that we won't get Mazars, I don't know, but certainly if there's a strong request from audit members to have a particular firm or not to have particular firms, I can go back to chat to Clive around actually putting that expression forward to them when we submit our formal kind of response back to them to say that we want to go ahead under the framework if that's what's agreed.
I mean, I very much respect your view, Rupen. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much.
If I just add, I'm an ex-auditor myself, so it's been quite refreshing to be able to work with Suresh, who kind of understands my perspective on this, and I kind of understand his perspective on things this year. It's been a good relationship.
That's very helpful. Thank you, Rupen.
Okay, thank you very much. I think item 10 is the urgent business. I have no notice of any urgent business on grounds of
Chair, I know I haven't spoken, but you've missed me altogether. My only opportunity to speak.
Oh, sorry, I didn't. Yeah, you put your hand up or something.
My hand's up, isn't it? It's still up. Can you see my hand up?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Look, not to worry. I'll be very brief, Chair. I know that you want to push on. Yeah. Okay. First of all, my apologies for being late to yourself and to the rest of the committee. I'm actually inclined to agree with Councillor Todd on this because we did push Mazars a lot. They promised on numerous occasions and never actually delivered, and those sort of things, come back to haunt us because it puts us in a difficult light, as a council, and certainly if now, as you looked at from the first item, as to the people are more savvy and looking at the council. If the council can't get their house in order, then they're not too impressed. And given the number of complaints, I reckon there will be a whole lot more, right, if this goes ahead. So I too wish that we make our expressions that we should not deal with Mazars, right? But I think we may have very little choice, because from my understanding of the process, the larger accountancy firms don't necessarily want to bid into this, so you get a reduced number anyway. So I don't know, who will be there in the mix and who will get appointed at that time. But certainly this problem, I'm glad to see that it has reduced, but I still believe that from Suresh, some of the things were being glossed over as to why there was slippage. I don't think he was being frank with us at that point. Yes, there are issues around COVID and staffing and all that, but we're now into second, third week of January. We're still pushing this ball further down the road. So I'm with you lot. If it has to be Mazars, it has to be Mazars, but I'd like it to be not Mazars. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor
Chair,
Mann.
could I just come back in on that important point?
All right. Yeah.
Yeah. I think I would now consider myself neutral about Mazars. I would caution against us making any particular statements on that, because we have gone through the pain of transition to Mazars and a learning curve, etc. with them. It is possible that that we would have a further pain if we changed again. So I would. I feel that there might be it might be appropriate to have an offline conversation, particularly including Clive, before this comes to council, and we formalise whatever our position is or representations to PSAA are. I'm just urging a little bit of caution there, given the learning curve and transitions that we've been through.
Okay, thanks very much, Councillor Easton. Now we begin item number 11, date of next meeting.
Chair, I think Rupa wanted to come back. Yeah, so it might be a good idea to give her an opportunity.
Okay.
Chair, I will take that away to feed back to Clive and come back to members on that, because I think there probably is a discussion around actually what the response looks like into PSA, and I know that we talked about this at a previous audit committee. So I will take that back, Councillor Eason, and speak to Clive, and then kind of engage with committee members kind of before Borough Council. And one final thing, just note that actually for this, it is a Borough Council decision. So the legislation states that. So this bit will go to Council in early March for formal approval by the whole Council. So it's a Council-led decision in terms of which option we choose to take.
Yes.
Chair, can I ask a quick question to Rupen? I mean, we have to change after so many years, don't we? Or just, is it 5 years you must have a fresh auditor?
The chances are they will probably shake it up and change it, yes. I don't know.
So how many years have we had this current firm?
So Mazars we will have had for 4 or 5 years by the end of the process.
So too long.
Yeah. So because we've obviously got this current year's audit to go and the 21-22 audit to go and the 22-23 audit to go.
Okay, that's very clear. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you very much to all of you for all this hard work, and we declare the meeting closed, and wish you all very happy journey.